They say blood is thicker than water. But what they don't tell you is that blood can also poison you from the inside out. My name is Elena, and the day my mother's platinum credit card arrived in a velvet box, I thought it was love. Turned out, it was a loaded gun, and my own family was waiting to see if I'd pull the trigger on myself. I remember standing in my cramped studio apartment in Brooklyn, staring at that card like it might burn my fingers. The note attached was brief, clinical, for your discretionary use. Let's see what you build. Mother. No warmth. No explanation. Just cold expectation wrapped in privilege. My mother, Victoria Ashford, wasn't the type to give gifts without strings. She was a venture capitalist who treated emotions like bad investments, something to be minimized and controlled. My older brother, Marcus, had inherited her calculating nature, always 3 moves ahead in a game I didn't know we were playing. And my younger sister, Bethany, she'd perfected the art of looking innocent while sharpening knives behind her back. I should have known better. I should have thrown that card in the trash and walked away. But there was something inside me, some desperate, aching part that still wanted to prove I belonged in this family. That I wasn't the mistake they treated me like. The first time I used the card was at a women's shelter in the Bronx. I'd been volunteering there for 2 years, ever since I left the corporate law firm where my mother had installed me like a chess piece she could control. The shelter needed everything: new beds, a security system, food supplies, counseling services they couldn't afford. I made one call to the director, Lisa, a woman whose hands were rough from work and whose eyes held more wisdom than any boardroom I'd ever sat in. "How much do you need?" I asked. She gave me a figure that would barely dent the card's limit. I doubled it. For the first time in months, I felt something close to purpose. Not the hollow achievement of closing deals that enriched people who already had too much, but real, tangible good. I watched women who'd been beaten down by life begin to stand a little straighter. I saw children smile who'd forgotten how. I didn't tell my family. This was mine, something they couldn't twist or taint with their approval or disdain. But I was naive to think I had any privacy. 3 weeks later, my phone rang. Marcus. His voice had that smooth, patronizing quality he'd perfected over years of making people feel small. "Elena, we need to talk about your spending." My stomach dropped. "What are you talking about?" Mother's concerned. "She's been reviewing your transactions." "A women's shelter? Really? You're supposed to be building something that reflects the family legacy, not playing fairy godmother to lost causes." The words hit like a slap. Lost causes. That's what he called women trying to escape violence, trying to survive. Those women aren't lost causes, Marcus. There. Save it. Mother wants to see you. Tomorrow. Her office. Don't be late. He hung up before I could respond. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the darkness, staring at the water-stained ceiling of my apartment, and felt something shift inside me. Not fear. Rage. Cold, clarifying rage. They'd been watching. Tracking. Judging. This wasn't a gift. It was surveillance disguised as generosity. The next morning, I arrived at my mother's Manhattan office. The building was all glass and steel, reflecting clouds and sky, making it impossible to see inside until you were already trapped. Her assistant, a young woman who looked terrified of her own shadow, ushered me into the corner office overlooking Central Park. Victoria sat behind her desk, perfectly composed in a charcoal suit, her silver hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. Marcus stood by the window, arms crossed. Bethany sat in the corner, her expression somewhere between sympathy and satisfaction. Elena. My mother's voice could cut through granite. Sit. I remained standing. What is this about? Your judgment, apparently. She tapped a file on her desk. $23,000 to a women's shelter. $15,000 to a legal aid clinic. $8,000 to a youth mentorship program. This isn't what we discussed. We never discussed anything. You gave me a card and told me to build something. I meant build a business, establish a foundation that bears our name, create something with lasting impact and visibility. Not throw money at band-aid solutions that do nothing to address systemic issues. The corporate speak made my skin crawl. Those band-aid solutions are keeping women alive, mother. They're keeping kids off the streets. That is systemic impact. Marcus scoffed. It's charity. It's emotional, not strategic. It's human, I shot back. Something you'd understand if you ever left this tower and actually looked at the world. Bethany spoke for the first time, her voice soft, sweet, lethal. Elena, we're just worried about you. You've been different since you left the firm. We want to make sure you're okay. The false concern made my blood boil. I'm better than I've ever been. Victoria stood, smoothing her suit jacket. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to redirect your efforts towards something more appropriate. Marcus has a contact at a tech incubator. You'll invest in startups, build a portfolio we can showcase. That's leadership. That's legacy. And if I refuse? Her smile was thin, sharp. Then the card gets deactivated, and we'll have a very public conversation about your judgment, your instability, and your inability to handle responsibility. Your choice. The room felt airless. This was the test. Not whether I could spend wisely, but whether I would obey. Whether I would bend to their vision of who I should be. I looked at Marcus, smug and certain. At Bethany, hiding her glee behind concern. At my mother, who'd never once asked me what I wanted, what I needed, what made me feel alive. I need time to think, I heard myself say. Victoria nodded, as if my compliance was inevitable. You have 48 hours. I walked out of that office feeling like I was suffocating. The elevator ride down felt endless, my reflection multiplied in the mirrored walls, 100 versions of me all trapped in the same cage. But by the time I reached the street, something had crystallized. They wanted me to choose between their approval and my integrity. They wanted me to prove I was like them, that blood really was thicker than everything else. I wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. I went back to my apartment and started making calls. Not to investors or business contacts, but to journalists I'd met over the years. To watchdog organizations. To people who specialized in exposing corporate malfeasance and family dynasties built on exploitation. Because here's what my family didn't know. I'd spent 2 years at that law firm reviewing their business practices. I knew where the bodies were buried. I knew about the tax shelters, the questionable foreign investments, the environmental violations quietly settled out of court. I knew about the pension fund my mother had raided during a merger, leaving hundreds of retirees with nothing. I'd kept quiet because I'd been taught that family loyalty was sacred. But they'd just shown me that loyalty only flowed one direction, up toward power, never down toward compassion. The next 48 hours were a blur. I compiled documents, screenshots, financial records I'd kept as insurance. I wrote a detailed account of everything I'd witnessed, every questionable decision, every moment the Ashford family had chosen profit over people. And then I sent it all to a journalist named Claire who'd been investigating corporate corruption for decades. Are you sure about this? She asked when we met at a coffee shop in Queens. Once this goes public, there's no taking it back. I thought about the women at the shelter, about the kids in the mentorship program, about every person my family had stepped on to build their empire. I'm sure. The story broke on a Tuesday morning. The headline was simple: Ashford Empire built on broken promises, an insider's account. My phone started ringing immediately. I turned it off. For 3 days, I stayed in my apartment, watching the fallout from my laptop. News trucks camped outside my mother's building. Marcus gave a statement calling me disturbed and vindictive. Bethany cried on camera, playing the hurt sister perfectly. But the story had legs. Other journalists picked it up. Former employees came forward with their own accounts. Regulators started asking questions. On the fourth day, someone knocked on my door. I looked through the peephole and saw my mother standing in the hallway, alone, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. I opened the door but didn't invite her in. "You destroyed us," she said. Her voice was hollow, empty of its usual command. "No," I replied. "You destroyed yourselves. I just stopped protecting you from the consequences. Everything we built, everything we worked for, was built on suffering you ignored because it was profitable. You asked me to prove what I could build. I built a reckoning." She stared at me, and for a moment I thought I saw something human flicker in her eyes. Regret, maybe. Or just recognition that she'd miscalculated, that she'd handed a weapon to someone who actually had the courage to use it. "You'll regret this," she said finally. "No," I said. "I really won't." She left without another word. The lawsuits took months. My family hired the best lawyers money could buy, tried to paint me as unstable, vindictive, ungrateful. They froze me out completely, told extended family I was dead to them. But the evidence spoke louder than their lies. Settlements were reached. Fines were paid. My mother stepped down from her firm. Marcus lost his board positions. Bethany, clever as always, managed to distance herself just enough to survive relatively unscathed. 6 months after the story broke, I stood in the new community center we'd opened in the Bronx, funded by the settlement money I'd received from whistleblower protections. It wasn't grand or glamorous. Just a safe space with resources, counseling, job training, and hope. Lisa found me standing by the window, watching kids play basketball in the court we'd built. "You okay?" she asked. I thought about my mother's parting words. About the family I'd lost, the life I'd demolished. "Yeah," I said. "I think I finally am. Because here's what I learned, family isn't just blood. Family is the people who see you, who value you, who believe in your humanity even when it's inconvenient." I'd spent my whole life chasing approval from people who saw me as a pawn in their games. Now I was building something real. Not a legacy measured in dollars or power, but in lives changed, in dignity restored, in the radical act of choosing compassion over cruelty. They gave me a credit card to test my character. I used it to expose theirs. And I'd do it again in a heartbeat. Sometimes the greatest act of love is walking away from people who only know how to take. Elena's story shows us that real strength isn't about winning your family's approval. It's about having the courage to define success on your own terms, even when it costs you everything you thought you wanted. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what's right? Share your story in the comments below.